What if I told you that there is a proposal in a major US city to offer free or subsidized food? Yeah, there are talks and many proposals to give certain cities a government run grocery store. Let that sink in. But look at this right here. It says Boston officials explore city run grocery stores to combat rising food prices. Goes on to say grocery industry expert warns taxpayer funded stores could hurt small businesses. But according to reports, this is something that they're considering in Boston. This is something that, again, they worked on in the Bronx. This is something that even in Missouri, this was a problem, but they funded a grocery store that was the only one for like several miles, and then ultimately that store failed. It had to close. But listen to this, okay? I want to play this clip for you. Listen to this right here.
Boston is considering opening a city-run grocery store to tackle rising costs, even after Sunfresh in Missouri tried that and failed miserably.
I want to show you that really quick. This is it. This is in Kansas City. Look right here. It says a troubled Kansas City grocery store has closed despite nearly $18 million in city investments. Now, why am I showing you all this? Well, the reason is because we are seeing more politicians, okay? And the reason I'm saying politicians and not lawmakers is because these are people that want to represent their city, their state, potentially make it to the House of Representatives or even the Senate. And these people are proposing different ideas in order to give some assistance to their residents and their community members. Now, do I think a subsidized grocery store is a good idea? It could be, but the problem is, and this is all coming because SNAP benefits have been reduced, and now the federal government has put that responsibility onto these states. And so now the states are considering, is there an alternative where we can control what is going to which families, how much, and when? Let me read this to you, okay? Look at this right here. It says, City Council President Ruthie something, don't even know the name, and Councilor Liz Braden have requested a hearing to explore the idea, emphasizing it was not inspired by a similar proposal. It was not inspired by a similar proposal from New York City. Democratic Socialist mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani says the role of government is to step in when the market is failing our residents. The idea of government-sponsored, government-subsidized grocers is not a novel idea. Okay. Now, here's the reason why you need to understand this. Because what states are now looking at is to take that responsibility over from the federal government. They don't want the federal government having any say in what's going on, who can get these benefits, how much they're going to get, okay, and when they get them. These states are pushing back against the Trump administration. Now, I want to play the rest of this clip for you. Listen to this right here.
Kelly Saberi joins me now. All right, Kelly, give me the details on what Boston is trying to achieve.
Good morning, Ash. Well, we don't have any details of how they plan to execute this, but we know that the people who sponsor the proposal say that the city needs to be creative to help ensure all families in Boston have access to nutritious ingredients for their family. This, as the Greater Boston Food Bank says, 37% of Boston families face food insecurity at some point this year.
Okay. 37% of Boston families face a food insecurity just this year. Here's the reason why this is such an important number. This is not just in Boston. 37% of households in Boston. But what about in Seattle? What about in Los Angeles, in New York, in Miami, in Denver, okay? In Memphis, in Atlanta, okay? What about in all these other cities, even in Portland? What about all these other cities across the United States? every single one, is seeing an increase in need for food assistance at the same time that SNAP benefits have been reduced. So where do we go from here? Well, I'm going to play the rest of this clip, but here's the concern. SNAP benefits is already causing more problems because there's less people in the program. The next one is that some of these food banks are absolutely struggling. I talked to a friend of mine a couple weeks ago about how his food bank is doing. And the one thing that he said is that he's seeing less donations. Not as many businesses are donating. We're seeing some of these retailers that were previously liquidating their inventory. And I talked about this the other day where you could go into a grocery store and go to the back of the store and you see shelves full of clearance food. Now you're not seeing it because that's where a lot of people are going. That's all they can afford. So instead of going to the grocery store once every 2 to 3 weeks, they're going multiple times a week in order to get the items that are right there on that cutoff of being expired. And yet they come back a couple days later, get a few more items so that they can just make it through. That's what we're seeing. Let's keep listening to this.
In a statement, Councillor Liz Breeden said this, quote, severe cuts to SNAP as part of President Trump's big, beautiful bill mean food security for tens of thousands of Bostonians is now in peril. This, coupled with existing food deserts and the rising cost of groceries, makes the need for alternative modes of food access vital. But other trade groups we spoke with say this will be a blow to existing businesses.
This is a huge concern. This is the only, or one of the biggest drawbacks that I see of this. When you subsidize a specific grocery store, what happens to the grocery store down the street? And I understand in the case of this one right here, okay, this Kansas City grocery store, I understand where this, it made sense because this was the only grocery store for miles. Look at this right here. It says, the Sun Fresh at 31st Street and Prospect Avenue is one of the only grocery stores for miles and has been struggling to fill shelves recently despite the 10 years of taxpayer money to renovate it and keep it in business. But what's interesting about this specific one, and this closed, I believe, in August, but what's interesting about this is that it was the only one for miles. But the concern was that people were going to this store. It was getting thousands of visitors. But here's the problem. What happens when the prices for these food items go up? What happens when the state can't put in the funding that it was? So the subsidized groceries are now becoming more expensive. And then people start thinking, well, is this really something for me? Or should I be going somewhere else? That's the concern, is that taxpayers could be spending more money to fund these different subsidized grocery stores all throughout major cities here in the United States. The concern is, when does it stop? And then, how do you choose which grocery store is going to have subsidized food? Do you pick a Walmart? Do you pick a Fred Meyer, a Kroger? Do you pick a Costco? Right? Probably not. But why would somebody want to go to one specific grocery store? Okay, let's say they have options right now. Let's say there's a Kroger and there's a Whole Foods, and then you got a Safeway down the street. You got those 3 grocery stores you get to pick from. Well, what if the city only decided that Kroger was the only one that's going to get subsidized groceries? How does that make it fair for the other ones? How does that make it fair for the convenience stores, right? And I talked about this earlier, where convenience stores, specifically 7-Eleven, was closing its doors for about over 500 locations just in 2025. And they're doing so because of inflation, because of what we are seeing, the convenience factor. And so I'm bringing this to your attention because this right here is extremely important. I don't think this passes in Boston, but is this going to pop up somewhere else? The answer is likely yes. Let's keep listening to this.
If you eliminate the overhead cost of rent, then you should be able to price goods lower. But how does that help a small businessman or woman thrive in the city or in the state? It doesn't. It's just direct competition. And how far does this plan go? Are we going to take everything and make it a government service?
While the
It's interesting because what he said is if you just bring down rents, then it makes things cheaper. If you just bring down rent, then guess what happens? Then your expenses are not as high for that grocery store, which means they can technically bring down the cost of those goods. But I'm going to take this one step further. What if we also brought down the minimum wage? Again, I'm not saying this is a good idea. I'm not saying we need to consider this, but think about it. Where does that line stop? If we are going to subsidize food costs, could we subsidize rent? Should we tell people that no, you don't deserve $20 an hour anymore? We're actually going to reduce that down to $17.50. Because that right there is going to bring the cost of food down. I'm just bringing this to your attention because this is what politicians are now looking at. This is what some city officials across the United States are looking at. How can we take some of the money that we are able to save, because some cities are operating at a surplus, how can we take some of that money and give it back to our residents so that they can spend it the way they see fit, whether it's on food, utilities, rent, car payments, student loans, whatever it may be. How can they spend it the way they see fit? We're going to see what happens, but the one thing I can tell you right now is that Boston is looking at this. The Bronx, again, was looking at this. Kansas City, Missouri did this for several years. We're seeing other cities across the United States are considering things just like this, where a new proposal is popping up every single week to try to bring down the cost of food, bring down the cost of rent, bring down the cost of everything, because everyone's saying we currently have an affordability crisis. So we'll see what happens from this, but the one thing I can tell you is be prepared, because stories like this are going to continue to pop up simply because everyone's looking for ways to make things more affordable. So just want to thank you guys for watching. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys on the next one.